Chapter 2. Barely a week after the Bagleys' debacle, Flora made the 3-hour drive from Freya's home in Ripon to Brigley Prior, the Cambridgeshire village that was home to Jemima Gartside Smith. It was mostly a straight run down the A1, singing her head off to heart radio. A couple of times she caught herself craning her head to check the dogs were all right, each time remembering they weren't with her today, which always felt like she was missing an arm or a leg. The next time she made this journey, touch wood, they'd be with her. Once she saw the signs for Cambridge, Felixstowe and Newmarket, she slid off the motorway and felt the first quivers of pre-interview nerves kick in. Away from the dual carriageway, Flora always felt slightly concerned navigating small country lanes by sat-nav. In the past, on the way to shows, her current model had a penchant for taking her the wrong way down one-way streets and into dubious inner-city ghettos. Today, her ancient but robust 4x4 was playing chicken with the odd tractor or two, and at times the road dropped away either side into a drainage ditch. She kept putting her foot down to reach the next safe passing place before encountering oncoming traffic. She was a country girl at heart, but scenic North Yorkshire was very different from the flat croplands she was glimpsing here. In places there was nothing to see but vegetation for miles, bleakly dull and foisty-smelling farm crops with few properties in sight. Flora shuddered as she speculated that at night it would be very eerie if you happened to get stuck out here. She gasped as a corner curved a bit too sharply, belatedly realising it was the one Lady Gartside Smith's assistant had warned her about when she'd called with the arrangements. As she corrected her steering, there was a flash of a weathered-looking but beautifully crafted windmill, swiftly followed by the widening of the landscape and the slight drop down into Brigley Prior village. The scenery looked much more promising, much to Flora's relief, as she clocked the beautifully manicured village green, flanked by an array of cosy cottages and a pub. Looking beyond, Flora could see a small church topped by a very ornate spire. She met a T-junction in the road and, following instructions, headed in that direction. Brigley Hall was situated 1.5 miles further down the road, its acreage backing onto the fenlands. In summer they would no doubt turn lush and invitingly green, but currently they seemed a little stark and lonely. Flora crawled along the narrow lane, finally finding the gateway, which was almost invisible amidst an ominous-looking hedge. Once through that, she stopped as directed. It was hard to tell whether it was a driveway or a small road, but the instructions had been to park at the first property that she met. It was funny that, although the house was clearly worth a fortune, it didn't spring to mind the idea of a hall. It was more like a fancy barn conversion, and Flora wasn't quite sure she was in the right spot. Stepping out of the car and smoothing down her skirt, she grabbed her handbag and hurried across a courtyard covered in pristine white paving. The front door was equally handsome and made of a solid piece of reclaimed oak. She gave the brass poodle-shaped door knocker a subtle tap, trying to sound polite and not impertinent. The door cracked open, and a tall, slender redhead, dressed in classy business attire, greeted her. "Flora Marston?" "Hello, yes, that's me. Siobhan Brinsworth, we spoke on the phone. I'm Lady Gartside Smith's PA. Flora stuck out her hand, pleased to get an equally firm shake in return. Siobhan smiled in welcome. "I'm so glad you could come. I know I shouldn't say this, but you're the only decent applicant we've had, and her ladyship's frustration is reaching lava-like proportions. I hope that means you're looking for somebody to start straight away. If you had your belongings with you, I'd probably just skip the interview, move you into the cottage and thank my lucky stars for the reprieve." Flora gave the PA a quizzical look. She had to be in her late 30s and dressed sharp enough for a London office, but now that she was looking closer, the woman did appear a bit dog-eared around the edges. Maybe the stress was getting to her too. Miss Brinsworth's expensive-looking tights had a run in them, and somewhere along the way they'd gathered a fine film of white fluff from ankle to knee. Will I be meeting her ladyship today? Siobhan snorted, none too professionally. No, she's at the spa, no doubt driving everybody mad because she has to wait until I've resolved the situation. The situation? It might be simpler if you see it for yourself. Turning aside, Siobhan gestured for Flora to proceed down the hallway. Rooms opened up on both sides, allowing her to get a glimpse of lavish furnishings as she passed. Down the corridor, the hall turned into a sizable, newer extension, designed with the breeder's needs in mind. It was expensively tiled top to bottom, and an array of designer dog beds of different heights and sizes were lined up with military precision. Spotting a hidden alcove sealed with a baby gate, Flora recognised a state-of-the-art grooming and bathing setup. She sighed in appreciation. There was even a treadmill that would have cost well over £1,000. I don't suppose the house that comes with the job looks like this, she asked wistfully. No, it doesn't, but it has plenty of charm, and I'm sure you'll appreciate having your own space. I'll take you to look at the lodge once you see what you're up against. Aren't you supposed to be talking me into this, not out of it? Siobhan simply gestured towards the patio doors, which looked out onto two vast dog runs. I'm just trying to be honest. The ones on the left are the real reason for the job vacancy. The wording of the ad was a little more glamorous than the truth. Not a strategy I agreed with, if that's any consolation. Flora swallowed hard. It would have been funny if it wasn't all so tragic. A bit like Extreme Makeover if it was featuring the before and after of pedigree dogs. On the right, there were 8 pampered, spotless toy poodles, beautifully shaded in a mix of sweetie shop colours. Flora could see apricot, silver, a soft chocolate brown, champagne and white. On the other side were a ragtag bunch of variously sized, scrawny misfits. All of them wore sad, soulful expressions and bore dull, matted coats. One of the 5 was missing a back leg, and another was wearing a Hannibal Lecter muzzle which was hanging on by one ear. They would not, even in an alternate universe, appear photographed in the illustrated breed standards, not under the definition of poodle. I guess you can see why Lady Jemima is keen to keep them away from her show stock, Siobhan murmured. Her ladyship agreed on a deal about 6 months ago that made her the rescue officer for the Poodle Society of Central Great Britain. In turn, they gave her the honour of becoming the club's president. At the time, there were no dogs in the rescue and hadn't been for quite a while. This lot have trickled in over the last 3 weeks, and she's starting to panic in case more are on the way. Jemima agreed to take on the rescue role because... Oh, I can guess why she took it on, Flora butted in crossly. She thought it would give her some kudos to be a figurehead on the committee, further her ambitions too. Let me ask you this, though. Most people that take on a rescue are willing to put in the work themselves, seeing as it's a voluntary role. Is it safe to assume Lady Jemima isn't going to admit paying me a salary to handle this? I presume she's found some other way to fund it. In the strictest confidence, Flora, last year her ladyship had a substantial win on the lottery, and money is no object. She can afford to pay somebody else to do the dirty work while she takes the credit. Your discretion comes as part of the job description, and the reality is nobody will care as long as the job gets done. To be fair, she might ask you to work with the show team, but mostly it will be this sorry lot. What do you think? Siobhan jerked her head towards the pack of miscreants. Where are they being housed? Flora asked, not seeing an outdoor kennel anywhere. Siobhan fluffed her hair and quietly muttered, They've been in here, caged up in the grooming room for now. But, well, if you take the job, they have to live at the lodge with you. Flora sighed, not totally surprised. I think I better go look at that then next, if you don't mind. She glanced again at the 5 sorry-looking mutts. The supposedly aggressive one had managed to remove his muzzle and was shaking it around in his jaws. He was worrying it to pieces, but in a slightly sad, half-hearted manner, like he'd forgotten how to have fun. Flora's heart tweaked for them, imagining them as little pups going off to new homes only to end up like this, neglected, unwanted, and now as pawns feeding the ambitions of a bought and paid-for noblewoman. And she was pretty sure that Lady Jemima's title was whiffy. Money could always buy someone a glossy new veneer. Flora trailed back through the house behind Siobhan, who stopped in the hallway and picked up a set of car keys. It's about a mile further down the drive to the lodge. Come on, I'll take you in the Jag. It gives me an excuse to drive it. As Flora sank back into the soft leather seat, she breathed a sigh of pleasure. The more successful exhibitors always seemed to have money, and she'd missed the occasional exposure to the finer things. When the engine purred to life, she turned to Siobhan and said, "You seem quite scathing of your boss, especially when we've only just met. How do you know I won't turn around and tell her what you've said?" Siobhan huffed out a soft laugh. "I doubt she expects me to say anything favourable. To say we don't get along would be an understatement. We put up with each other because we're second cousins or something like that. She needs me and I need the job, and there are worse things I could be doing, or so I keep reminding myself." Flora kept her own counsel. She should probably give more thought to the consequences of working with people in conflict, and Siobhan seemed to sense what she was feeling. "It's not as bad as it sounds. We rock along fine for the most part. I tend to do as Jemima says because it's easier. In turn, she overpays me because she'd struggle to find a replacement. Lady Jemima? And yes, she does insist I call her by that title, then pretends not to hear what I call her under my breath. It's been working out better in the last 12 months. Money does make life easier sometimes." "So can I ask what you do, Siobhan?" "Sure. I'm sort of a jack of all trades and general dog's body, and that isn't even a joke. I manage Lady J's staff. There are gardeners, a cleaner, kennel maid, etc. I'm responsible for hiring and firing. I also double as her driver, answer her phone, pass on messages, and run the club and the show kennel's websites. She's been breeding seriously for a while now, but the site is getting a ton of new hits because the team really took off once she had the money to invest. Lady Jemima bred the mother of this year's Bagley's Best in Show winner, something even I'm quite proud of." Flora nodded, suitably impressed. "Try not to worry about her. Day to day, it's mostly about using your initiative. I'm here for backup if necessary, and I hope you can tell I'm an okay sort." Siobhan turned the car into a gravelled lay-by, barely large enough for two vehicles, and Flora's attention was drawn immediately to the gabled cottage set back from the road. The parking and house were in no way comparable to the flawlessness of Brigley Hall, but Flora thought it was the cutest thing she'd ever seen. An authentically old lodge, lacking the flashy makeover of its bigger brother. "This is it?" she asked. Awestruck, she struggled out of the low-slung, moulded leather seat. "Yes, but don't get too excited. This is all that's left of the original estate. It would have been a workman's cottage originally. There's basically 1.5 bedrooms, a double and something not big enough to be a box room. The bathroom is bijou, and downstairs it's a small kitchen and lounge with a postage stamp of a hallway. Come on, let's not stand around. It's getting really nippy out today." With just a paved buffer garden to the front and a short gated path, they were at the front door in seconds. Siobhan retrieved a key from under the mat. "It's very safe out here, but I wouldn't usually leave the spare outside. Fred, the local handyman, had to be able to come and go, and sometimes I wasn't around to let him in. Jemima didn't want him taking any keys home." Flora wasn't paying attention, too busy making plans in her head. She'd never had a whole house to herself, going from a bedroom at home to the flat over Pooch in Bowes, and finally the attic at Christopher's. The idea that she could make a real home for herself was enough to have her suppressing a squeal of excitement. She tried to tamp it down by figuring in the dog equation. Quarters were going to be tight. She had Fillmore and Riley for starters, then the 5 at the hall. "Can I see out the back first?" "Certainly. It's got a great garden. There's a patio, and we've had a timber prefab kennel put up. It's large enough for a few small dogs with boltable pens and a covered run." That was good news, but Flora only liked kennels for short spells or in case the dogs needed separating. She would be able to rotate them around when she needed some breathing room, but it wouldn't be warm enough for them to sleep out there. She didn't know if poodles were a hardy breed and had no experience of living with them. Flora opened the top half of the stable door and surveyed her new domain. She definitely wanted it. She wasn't sure about the job, but she wanted this house. The garden was a dream. The turf looked freshly laid and stretched for about 50 feet, meeting a dog-proof fence with a gate. The currently misty fens and the lovely dog walking they promised just filled Flora's field of vision. You're very quiet. Don't you like it? Most of the renovations to the cottage and garden are new. I tried to make it low maintenance and dog-friendly, within Jemima's begrudging budget, of course. The shed you can see beyond the kennel has full bathing facilities, so you don't need to come to the main house to groom your dogs. There are all the basic furnishings you should need. TV already set up, broadband connection. If there's anything else that was a deal breaker, I think I could swing it for you, within reason. It's not that. I'm just trying to act rationally for once. Figure out if I can make it work with my own 2 dogs as well. What would happen once these current rescues are rehomed? If there were no new cases for a while, would my job be safe? I can't see that being a problem. You would probably have to help out Lucy or do some of my grunt work. Lady Jemima won't want to run the risk of another sudden influx of rehomes. Having said that, Flora, there's no fixed contract. Right. Flora pondered on that as she turned and headed towards the staircase. It might turn out to be the stupidest decision she ever made, but this house felt like it was meant to be her home. As Siobhan had described, there was one decent double bedroom. It was freshly painted a crisp white with a pine bed and wardrobes just waiting for her bedding and clothes. There were enough shelves to display her few ornaments and books. The bathroom was equally functional and pretty enough to linger in for more than a quick scrub and dash out. The box room would make a little study or something else if she wanted. It currently had a daybed which was made up with exotic coloured pillows and a throw. The whole setup was a dream for somebody like Flora who'd never felt secure enough to settle. Forget living here temporarily. If she had the money, she'd probably want to buy it. Her mouth formed words without further delay. If we can agree on a salary, I'd like to accept. Before Siobhan could finish whooping with glee, she continued, I would need a couple of days off when my sister has her baby to make a flying visit. Siobhan was too busy pumping Flora's hand up and down to care. And when I move my stuff down, I'd like a day to organise myself before the dogs arrive. Is that okay? I can work with that. Let's go back to the main house and talk terms. I'm so pleased, I can't tell you. The only problem is it means Lady J will come back. Siobhan practically flew down the stairs and through the front door, making Flora laugh, despite the flutter of nerves tinkering with her insides. She was almost at the garden gate when Siobhan halted in her tracks, causing Flora to crash into her. Siobhan emitted a low whistle, followed by a slightly more discreet hubba hubba. Flora peeked around her shoulder to see what had drawn her attention. A man was sauntering down the main driveway, looking for all the world like he belonged there. He was tall and proportioned very nicely indeed, long-legged in his jeans and built on the rugged side. And boy, if he didn't move like he was cock of the walk. She only wished he wasn't a bit of a ginger. Flora didn't tend to go for red-headed men. Siobhan, on the other hand. Should he be down here? She poked Siobhan, who looked like she was about to drool any second. Oh, actually no, you're right. Excuse me, this is a private access road. The public right-of-way runs behind the houses. Siobhan gestured towards the fens, managing to sound both officious and flirtatious in equal measure. The interloper turned on his heel and gave the ladies a full appraisal, not worried about showing his interest in what he saw. He stretched up a denim-clad arm and ran his fingers through a thick wedge of slightly oily-looking hair. It stuck in place and stood straight up in a quiff, revealing a gentle widow's peak at his hairline. My apologies to you both. I assumed it was a through road, not a driveway. Okay. Now Flora thought it more feasible that he inspired a little drool. What a heavenly voice. Just the softest shade of Scots in it. It was the sort of brogue you'd pay to whisper naughty things in your ear at 2 a.m. She could almost forgive his gingerness. After all, Even hair that ginger probably didn't glow in the dark. Easily done, Siobhan cooed. We'll give you a lift back to the gate if you like. He came closer to them and shifted his backpack from one shoulder to the other, offering his right hand. Evan, I'm charmed to meet you. Siobhan. Miss Brinsworth was blatantly hindering Flora from view. If she were at a nightclub trying to pull, Flora would have been calling her a cock-blocker. And the other pretty lady behind you? I'm Flora. How do you do? She managed to slide an arm around Siobhan, despite them being log-jammed in the narrow gate. Much better now I've come across the two of you. Do you live here? Not me, Siobhan replied. Flora is about to. Evan's face fell, and Flora rolled her eyes, thinking he could have tried to make his disappointment less visible. As the three of them moved towards the Jaguar, she groaned as she noted that with only 2 doors on the car, Ginger Evan was going to get an eyeful of her backside as she hoofed it behind the front seat. Passing him within a few inches, she wrinkled her nose. He was in urgent need of either fumigation or a visit to the launderette, which qualified Flora's decision that the competition was welcome to him. Siobhan quite obviously had blocked sinuses because she almost had him in a half Nelson on the pretext of helping him off with his backpack. As she started the engine and executed a tight 3-point turn, she attempted to finagle what seemed like everything from his marital status to his inside leg measurement. Evan responded politely, but kept the facts vague, making mutterings about a short visit and staying with friends. With the windows closed, his pungent aroma was making Flora's eyes water. She reckoned as well as not washing, he'd probably stepped in a cow pat or something along his travels. She willed Siobhan to put her foot down, but she seemed to have found a gear slower than first. Eventually and mercifully, she couldn't eke the journey out any further, and they arrived back at the hall. Dirty and still flagrantly ginger, Evan turned in his seat and winked at her. It was nice to meet you, Flora. As he said her name, he had a sexy way of rolling his R's. It came out sounding more like Flora. But she remained unmoved. Flora did not have too many hang-ups about men, but basic hygiene was one of them. Evan stepped out of the car and Siobhan called after him. Would you like to join us for lunch? Flora flushed, and in a rare display of rudeness put her foot down. Miss Brinsworth, I think we need to finish our discussion in private. I'm sure you can invite... Evan, he prompted. Right, yes. Invite Evan another time. We have a lot to go over and I've got a long journey home. My sister is expecting me. Siobhan looked startled. She gave a visible headshake before smiling reluctantly. You could see she was wondering if once Jemima came home there might be 2 heads butting with her ladyship in future. Grieving slightly, she turned back to Evan and extended her hand, making sure she held it out, palm down. He took the hint and deposited a heavily bristled kiss on it. His attention moved to Flora, who jammed her hands in her pockets within seconds and gave him a coolly dismissive smile. For some reason, this seemed to prompt him to pull the strangest facial expression. He sort of boggled his forehead at her. Given the fact he had the most remarkable ice-blue eyes, the odd grimace gave him a moderately terrifying air. Flora blinked and stepped back. Maybe he was a serial killer. It would be bloody typical when she'd been so rude to him. Evan turned on his heel. See you around, ladies. He sauntered off with that sexy, wide-legged stance, and even the off-brand jeans couldn't disguise a rather world-class backside. Yum, yum, Siobhan murmured when he was out of sight. Smelly bum, Flora finished. Seriously? You didn't notice? He bloody ponged. Who cares? I'll just wash him, vigorously, by hand. He'll soon be as good as new, until he crawls back to whatever dung heap he's been rolling in. Flora, if you're going to live here, you'll soon find out that grade A beef is hard to come by, and he had quality stamped all over him. Flora held her hands up. I'm not going to argue over it. He's all yours, Miss Brinsworth. Don't be so formal. Call me Siobhan. We're going to make a good team, Flora. At the very least, we're going to be allies. Let's go have something to eat and talk salary." The undercover author smirked as he turned left out the driveway. His search for shelter had unearthed 2 unsuspecting victims, and either one would do quite nicely. Evan felt like he'd run the gamut of every possible emotion in the last 10 days, much of it masterminded by Ella with heinous amounts of glee. First, he'd arranged for Robert to have control of his accounts and the bank cards once the experiment was in play. Ella, Evan believed, might gain too much joy given control of his finances. She also had a penchant for expensive handbags. The only other option had been Dolores, and he'd decided to keep this latest descent into madness off her radar for the time being. The commitment, they all agreed, was for 3 to 6 months, which would also be the deadline for handing in a finished manuscript. The day the idea had first been agreed, Ella had approached him and asked him to stick out his hand. When he extended it, with some degree of trepidation, she had reverently placed an e-reader with a hot pink spangled cover on his palm. "This is a very precious object. I am temporarily gifting it to you for your genre-specific enlightenment. I will give you the password, but under no circumstances are you allowed to show it to Robert. We do not acknowledge its existence unless you wish to suffer great physical discomfort to your genitals." Evan must have looked baffled because Ella patted him on the cheek. "This is my much-treasured Kindle Filth, and it will teach you everything you ever needed to know about romance writing." Evan accepted it gingerly, and as the days passed and he became engrossed in his studies, it became increasingly hard not to blush when occupying the same room as Ella. Judging from her reading matter, he was surprised they'd even lasted 6 months. As someone who considered himself reasonably well-skilled, Ella had much higher expectations when it came to men and sex. It also gave him a new perspective on Robert. His slightly tubby friend had secret powers behind that sleepy facade. If he could sustain erections that appeased the desires inspired by Ella's priapic book studs. Once he'd worked to expunge the idea of the 2 of them in some of the more colourful scenarios, Evan began to identify there was a myriad of rules and critical elements that seemed to run through all of the stories. He quickly compiled a list of things he needed to try on some test subjects, interested to know if more than one woman he deemed a card-carrying feminist secretly coveted men who demanded submission. Maybe he'd wasted his time ignoring his interest in bondage all these years. His relationship with Ella would have probably lasted longer if he'd known he could tie her up whenever she got on his nerves. Evan filed away this discovery and all sorts of other things to include if he wanted his book to sell. Interested to find there was often no full-on sex until 60% into the plot. So in real life, an early dry spell was to be considered if he adhered to the rules. The other thing he struggled with was character description. What was the whole thing with funny eye colours? Evan was 33, and he was reasonably sure he'd never met another soul, male or female, with actual grey eyes. Nearly every other story somebody had grey eyes. Where were all these grey-eyed alien fuckers? In one story, a man was somehow golden-eyed, and he wasn't even a werewolf. As far as Evan was concerned, there were only 3 sensible eye colours in this world: brown, blue and green. If a person were awkward, they could have hazel eyes, but that's it, period. His characters were having normal eyes, which exist in nature, even if it cost him a few sales. And did women really want to screw bears? All questions that troubled him. But maybe they did, seeing as the furry bastard seemed to give 4 orgasms to every one of theirs. Fucking ball bags, he'd thought to himself. In between bouts of having his masculinity dented, Evan tied up his affairs, left his bills up to date, and bought some suitably broken-in clothes from a charity shop. He whittled down the other items he might need and stuffed them all into a backpack that he ran over with Robert's car. and then it had been time for the experiment to begin. Robert had withdrawn a few £100 from Evan's account, secretly more generous than Ella had sanctioned. It wasn't that much of a safety net when he tended to go through cash like Monopoly money. His only other backup was a prepaid mobile phone, the ugliest one available. It was loaded with £10, which, other than a once-weekly text message to confirm he was alive, was strictly for emergencies. With the groundwork executed successfully, Evan bummed it around London for a couple of days until he looked and felt a little rougher around the edges. It was a relief to know he wasn't spending the duration in the city, because it was currently horrendous. March had stayed bitterly cold, and spring was starting to look like it wasn't coming. Intermittent snow flurries were still plaguing the country, and finding safe places to doss down had been difficult. The first 2 nights outside he'd thought he'd found shelter, only to be moved on by the police. The lack of decent sleep had quickly discouraged him, and it was purely the need to come through for Dolores that stopped him from blowing some cash on a warm bed for the night. That and the grizzled faces of the genuinely homeless. To break the monotony, he'd offered his services to a teenage busker, coaxing money out of tube-goers with his trusty grin and natural patter. In keeping with his new identity, Evan had negotiated his help for a percentage of the profits, but felt sick at the idea of taking the boy's money. He just came up with ways to slip it back into his cap when he wasn't looking. On the 3rd evening, the busker's sister came looking for him. The girl was barely 18, with a baby in tow and living in a run-down flat. She was trying to get her brother to move in, but at 15 he'd started abusing drugs, which probably explained why the guy hallucinated so vividly Evan hardly slept to protect both of their safety. As she bent to pick up some of the boy's belongings, he slipped £100 into her coat pocket. Watching them walk away, he tried to brush off the wave of futility that washed over him. Young minds already ruined, and raw talent going unnoticed. Was this the underlying story of the long months stretched out ahead? Evan had never suffered more than a slight blue mood in his life, but if this pattern continued, he knew he wouldn't be writing any bum-fluff romance. He'd be writing his account of post-traumatic stress.